Hey guys. So, by a show of hands, how many people have read Ulysses?
Hearts?
And how many people plan to eventually read it?
Sure.
See, I just have some stuff I wrote to introduce the book a little bit. Last year I only wrote a page. This year I wrote 4 pages, so I'll try to get through it quick. I know there's a lot of people that are going to read today. So what is Bloomsday all about, really? I think it mainly boils down to celebrating 3 things. James Joyce, his most famous novel, Ulysses, and the book's main character, Leopold Bloom. So for today, I'm going to talk about some characteristics of Ulysses and the main character, Bloom. But first, just a quick word about Joyce himself. William Faulkner called Joyce, quote, a genius who is electrocuted by a divine fire. Philip K. Dick said, quote, Joyce was plugged into a cosmic consciousness from which he derived the inspiration for his entire corpus of work. Just a brief history of Ulysses. It was written during the years 1914 and 1922 in Trieste, Zurich, and Paris. It originally started out as an idea for a short story in Dubliners, built around a simple act of kindness in which a good Samaritan saves a drunken young man. It was based on a story that had happened to Joyce when he was a young man, from a drunken physical altercation in the street and prevents him from getting arrested. The story swelled into a gigantic epic novel in which the altercation from that original idea doesn't even occur until the 15th chapter. The novel takes place entirely on one day, June 16, 1904, spread out over 18 episodes, each covering 1 hour, each one written in a different style. And by the way, today, Bloomsday is Thursday, and in the book it's also Thursday. When it was published in 1922, it was banned and burned and labeled as obscene. You could not legally possess a copy of the book in the United States until 11 years after it was published. Kevin Birmingham had a recent book called The Most Dangerous Book. It really details the legal battles and the publishing misadventures of Ulysses really well. I highly recommend that book. The first edition of Ulysses was published by the Shakespeare Company bookstore in Paris. The first edition was a huge cinder block of text. It looked like a cross between the Bible, an encyclopedia, and a phone book, which was Joyce's intention, as evidenced by the book's content. It's filled with biblical references, endless allusions to virtually every branch of knowledge, and hundreds of regular people, many of them real citizens and inhabitants of Dublin in 1904. And here's a quick quote, and I'll give you the source of this quote in a minute. Its shape and size indicated that the reader was not offered yet another handy entertainment, but the book, to be read and reread, to be studied and revered. The first 2 words of the text, stately, plump, are actually a really good description of the physical book itself. And the first word, stately, contains within it the last word of the book, yes. Ulysses is filled with these kinds of Easter eggs and hidden puzzles and riddles. I'm going to talk a lot about those. I'm just really interested in those. There's 3 parts of the book corresponding to the 3 central characters: Stephen Dedalus, Leopold Bloom, and his wife Molly Bloom, linking to the 3 central characters in Homer's Odyssey: Telemachus, Odysseus, and Penelope. And I'll show you real quick. If you look at the first page of each of those parts, it has the letter on the first page of each part corresponds to the characters in that part. So this whole middle part here is it's known as the Wanderings of Ulysses. It's basically the Wanderings of Leopold Bloom. It's 15 chapters, and it begins with a huge M, and that's because Mr. Leopold Bloom, the whole day, he's thinking about his wife Molly. He's just constantly reminiscing about her, and he's thinking about the fact that she's at home having a liaison with some guy that she's singing with. She's a singer, and she's cheating on him. And then the final part starts with a P because this is where the famous Molly chapter is, and Molly's nickname for her husband Leopold is Poldy. So Joyce was really interested in and focused on the physical design of the book. I recently read a fun little book called Joyce and Literature, Liberating Literature, by a Joyce scholar from Poland that describes Joyce's meticulous efforts in shaping the final printed book. As the book neared publication, he incessantly inscribed new material onto the page proofs, partly in order to position text onto page in a certain manner. For instance, in the first edition of Ulysses, page 77 has seventh heaven inserted as the seventh sentence in a paragraph. Page 88, Bloom reads an obituary about a man who died at age 88. When Bloom ponders the rate of falling bodies, which is 32 feet per second, it's in a 30-second sentence of a paragraph. And also, the first edition consisted of 732 pages, as pointed out by Joyce scholar John Kidd. 732 is the number of days and nights in a leap year, and 1904 happened to be a leap year. And then all the subsequent editions and publications of Ulysses, all that pagination and all those things that he inserted in there got all messed up, so you don't really see a lot of those anymore. But synchronicity and numerology were really important for Joyce. Consider the number 22, for instance. His birthday was February 2nd, 1882. Ulysses was published on his birthday, February 2nd, 1922, 22. There's 22 words in the first sentence. Stephen, one of the main characters, is 22 years old. Even the date, June 16th, 6 plus 16 is 22. Bloom had a son, Rudy, who died 11 years ago in the book when he was 11 days old. And there's lots more. He does that with a lot of different numbers. Ulysses is absolutely filled with synchronicity. It's one giant ode to synchronicity. Of course, it was published years before Carl Jung coined that term, but Joyce was deeply intrigued by the phenomenon. In Ulysses, he calls it homonymity. The word coincidence also appears over a dozen times in the book. Sheldon Brivick's book, Joyce the Creator, attempts to list all the synchronicities that happen in Ulysses. He finds over 200 of them. Keep in mind, this is a book that takes place over the span of one day. I think Joyce is trying to awaken our awareness to the mysteries of everyday life. Mindfulness is a really popular concept nowadays that you see everywhere. When I read Ulysses for the first time, I remember it gave me a heightened sense of awareness. Joyce so thoroughly portrays the interplay of his character's inner world with the outer world that it made me very mindful of my own inner experience and how thoroughly linked it is with the outside world and my sensory experience of it. Reading Ulysses made me more aware of all the little details and sensations of everyday experience. On a similar note, John Higgs, in his recent book, Stranger Than We Can Imagine, An Alternative History of the 20th Century, talks about the prolonged concentration that is necessary to read Joyce's work. He sees this as an antidote to the attention deficit of the 21st century, likening the effect of reading Ulysses to the experience of practicing the concentration exercises of George Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff believed most people live their lives in a state of hypnotized, waking sleep, and he taught different techniques to wake people up to a state of heightened focus, understanding, ability, and joy. This analogy perfectly captures my experience of reading Ulysses. Consider for a moment the concentration that Joyce poured into constructing this book. I've hinted at some of the overriding organization and structure, but on a smaller scale, we have as an example the story told by Frank Budgeon, the painter who frequently spent time with Joyce in Zurich while Joyce was writing Ulysses. They met up for a walk one evening, and Budgeon asked, "How's Ulysses progressing?" And Joyce said he'd been working hard all day. And Budgeon said, "Oh, does that mean you've written a great deal and you've made a lot of progress?" And Joyce said, "2 sentences." And Budgeon said, "Were you seeking the right words?" And Joyce said, "No, I have the words already, and I'm seeking is the perfect order of words in the sentence." Despite all of its painstaking design in both the macro and micro sense, within that intricately designed structure is, quoting from Finnegan's Wake, as human a little story as paper could well carry. Ulysses is a deeply human novel. The main character, Leopold Bloom, is generally considered to be the most thoroughly depicted character in any book ever. As he wanders the city, we witness his innermost thoughts, memories, and reflections. We follow him as he eats, sleeps, farts, urinates, defecates, masturbates, drinks, argues, bathes, and does everything else a human does in the course of a regular day. More importantly, Bloom is a good man, a man of sympathy, kindness, and compassion. He engages in random acts of kindness all throughout the day, and the book's climactic event is him saving the young, drunken Stephen from getting beat up or arrested during an altercation, and then taking the wayward youngster home. Despite his best virtues, oftentimes in Ulysses, Bloom is under attack, whether directly or indirectly. Not only is some asshole going to his house to sleep with his wife that day, Bloom is subject to bigotry and discrimination for the simple fact that he's half Jewish. His dad is Jewish. A gentle, intelligent, and reasonable man, he doesn't exactly fit in when hanging out in the bars of 1904 Dublin. In describing the day's most harrowing altercation to Stephen, I'm sure we'll read that altercation happens in the Cyclops episode. When he's describing that altercation to Stephen later towards the end of the book, Bloom shares a credo that I think speaks to our current moment in time pretty powerfully and shows why Joyce's fictional hero is worth celebrating. On page 643, he says, "I resent violence or intolerance in any shape or form. It never reaches anything or stops anything. It's a patent absurdity on the face of it to hate people because they live around the corner and speak another vernacular, so to speak." That's it. So I'm going to read one passage, and then I know there's a lot of people that are also going to read passages, so I'll get this out of the way quick. Let's see. My favorite part of the book is the, where did it go?
I think it was benign.
It's funny because I'm going to read about water.
He had a mini water.
Yes.
It disappeared. So the second to last chapter of the book, so all throughout the book, each chapter, the styles are evolving until the middle of the book where the chapter is in the style of, thanks. In the middle of the book, this one chapter, which is all about birth and gestation, it's in a maternity hospital. The style throughout that chapter is evolving through 9 different styles, starting with what sounds like a direct English translation of Latin. It's very dry, and then it kind of evolves into eventually more modern type English. And then at the end of that chapter, it's just like drunken gibberish. And then after that, the style totally starts getting very strange. And here, towards the end of the book, it's really dry, scientific. Joyce said he was going to portray the characters as if they were like celestial bodies. It's a catechism. It's all question and answer, and the answers are really lengthy and very scientific. So Joyce is basically portraying this realistic scene, but he's doing it with these questions and answers that are ridiculous, that have way too much detail, but I love this chapter. So at one point, Bloom is filling up a teapot with water to make tea for him and Stephen. And there's a whole paragraph that describes thoroughly the water going from the reservoir all through all the pipes and eventually making its way to his sink. And there's another chapter, another part where Bloom is just thinking about water. Bloom is a really scientific, curious guy. So I'm going to read that passage. "What in water did Bloom, water lover, drawer of water, water carrier, returning to the range, admire? Its universality, its democratic equality and constancy to its nature and seeking its own level, its vastness in the ocean of Mercator's projection, its unplumbed profundity in the sun-dammed trench of the Pacific exceeding 8,000 fathoms, the restlessness of its waves and surface particles, visiting in turn all points of its seaboard, the independence of its units, the variability of states of sea, its hydrostatic quiescence and calm, its hydrokinetic turgidity in neap and spring tides, its subsidence after devastation, its sterility in the circumpolar ice caps, Arctic and Antarctic, its climactic and commercial significance, its preponderance of 3-to-1 over the dry land of the globe, its indisputable hegemony extending in square leagues over all the region below the subequatorial Tropic of Capricorn, the multi-secular stability of its primeval basin, its luteal fulvous bed, its capacity to dissolve and hold in solution all soluble substances, including millions of tons of the most precious metals, its slow erosions of peninsulas and downward trending promontories, its alluvial deposits, its weight and volume and density, its imperturbability in lagoons and highland tarns, its gradation of colors in the torrid and temperate and frigid zones, its vehicular ramifications in continental lake-contained streams and confluent ocean-flowing rivers with their tributaries and transoceanic currents, Gulf Stream, north and south, equatorial courses, its violence in sea quakes, water spouts, artesian wells, eruptions, torrents, eddies, freshets, spates, ground swells, watersheds, water partings, geysers, cataracts, whirlpools, maelstroms, inundations, deluges, cloudbursts. Its vast circumterrestrial ahorizontal curve, its secrecy in springs and latent humidity revealed by rhabdomantic or hygrometric instruments and exemplified by the hole in the wall at Ashtown Gate, saturation of air, distillation of dew, the simplicity of its composition, 2 constituent parts of hydrogen with 1 constituent part of oxygen, its healing virtues, its buoyancy in the waters of the Dead Sea, its persevering penetrativeness in runnels, gullies, inadequate dams, leaks on shipboard, its properties for cleansing, quenching thirst and fire, nourishing vegetation, its infallibility as paradigm and paragon, its metamorphoses as vapor, mist, cloud, rain, sleet, snow, hail, its strength in rigid hydrants, its variety of forms and lofts and bays and gulfs and bights and guts and lagoons and atolls and archipelagos and sounds and fjords and minches and tidal estuaries and arms of sea, its solidity in glaciers, icebergs, ice flows, its docility in working hydraulic mill wheels, turbines, dynamos, electric power stations, bleach works, tanneries, scotch mills, its utility in canals, rivers, if navigable, floating and grading docks, its potentiality derivable from harnessed tides or watercourses flowing from level to level, its submarine fauna and flora, acoustic photophobe, numerically, if not literally, the inhabitants of the globe, its ubiquity as constituting 90% of the human body, the noxiousness of its effluvia and lacustrine marshes, pestilential fens, faded flower water, stagnant pools, and the waning moon.
Ulysses, I read bits of it, it's one day at a time for dyslexics. Is it If He Had Smiled?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so the setup for this, I was just at Heroes and Legacies up on 183 at the cigar shop. I go to places like this and pretend that I'm like one of these guys who sits around with a bunch of, Wall Street guys smoking cigars, talking about trading, and pretend that I'm one of them. Experimenting with identity is sort of one of the things. So I called Peter and said, come on up. And so when he got there, he reminded me that I had told him the story about this passage in Ulysses, and suggested that I read it. So that's where this comes from. I was talking with a guy who had run for mayor in Oklahoma City prior to the bombing, and he didn't win. But he, after the bombing, he went through this life change, and he moved, and he started hanging out like at bars and coffee shops and stuff, and became this totally different person. And Turned out to be a really interesting guy. We shared emails, and we actually knew someone in Oklahoma City. So I'm going to flash forward, back and forward across time here. In 1989, I was here in Austin, and I was working at the Access Television station here and editing different things. And I met a guy there who was working on his first film, which was called "You Can't Learn to Plow by Reading Books." It's a Russian phrase that I can't tell you the Russian, but we hit it off really well. We had a lot of interest in shared movies, so he wanted me to work on his movie. So I became the editor and did a lot of things with him in the movie, and he has a scene in this movie. The movie at that time was called "No Longer, Not Yet," which was a title that I really liked. So there's a scene in the movie where this guy's been jilted by his girlfriend. He solicited a couple of friends of his to orchestrate this event on a bridge in Austin, where he throws his girlfriend's typewriter off of a bridge while the guy reads this passage from Ulysses. And there's some irony here, and there's some interesting aspects of it about one of the things that we have with sexual relationships. Often we really immerse ourselves into trying to become the thing that our lover sees in us, and because we admire these people, we want to become something that they admire, and we sort of feed off of that identity. And what's interesting about this scene is kind of the irony of the scene, because of the content of the passage, at least the way that I read it, is Joyce pretending to be writing as a guy who's sort of Jewish, Leopold Bloom, partly Jewish, talking about coming to terms with his jealousies, and his loss of identity because of his wife's lovers and this sort of thing. Flash forward. 2001, I went to New York, and I didn't participate, but I went to this thing called thisinfo.com. I don't know if anybody here's heard of that, but Robert Anton Wilson was there, and he held forth. But Genesis P. Orridge was there. And Genesis P. Orridge is a really interesting guy, if you guys haven't heard of him. I forgot the name of the band. It's like Current 93, but it's this kind of a cult-oriented...
Psychic TV.
Psychic TV, thank you. Yeah. I've also got a bad memory. So Genesis P. Orridge has been going through this long process of changing his identity from a male into a female. Not just into a female, but into the exact image of his lover, who has since died, but he hasn't stopped going through these operations to make him change. So he was in full drag, but he kept talking about how his identity was not his body. And he kept gesturing to the side of him. He says, I am not that identity, I am something else. So he had managed to do two things at once, the irony there, of changing all these physical manifestations of his identity into someone else, but at the same time maintaining something, within himself. So this passage, go ahead and read the passage. It's very short here. While they're throwing the typewriter off the bridge, he reads, "If he had smiled, why would he have smiled? To reflect that each one who enters imagines himself to be the first to enter. Whereas he is always the last term of a preceding series, even if the first term of a succeeding one, each imagining himself to be first, last, only, and alone, whereas he is neither first, nor last, nor only, nor alone in a series originating in and repeated to infinity." So while we were editing this scene, it was kind of a messy shot scene. We had to cut more than we usually did in these scenes in this movie. I had to cut out a piece of dialogue in order to make it fit. And Rick was making fun of me because he said, this is really funny, you're editing James Joyce, you know. It's like, I didn't get it, because, you know, James Joyce was at that time. So while we're making the movie, people started calling each other slacker on the set, and so the name of the movie changed, which is all right, it's a much catchier term. That is sort of the end of my anecdote, I guess. To lead to fade into infinity.
Just so everybody knows, we do have a Poor Man's Fortune. We're going to be playing in a little bit, so if we could do the readings from the, go ahead and do the readings, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Becky, for that wonderful corn
Oh, go ahead, Marty.
beef. If you haven't had it, wow. Come live with me. My name is Brian, and I've been affiliated with Peter's Fitting His Weight group for probably just under 2 years. And I'm a lifelong lover of Joyce's writing in all flavors and forms, but I sincerely was intimidated by Fitting His Wake, and it was only in that format, in like a page or two at a time, that I was able to take it on, and it's been a wonderful adventure. But my long preoccupation had been with Ulysses. I'm going to read a short passage from Cyclops. And, you know, as Peter said, each chapter mirrors a chapter out of the Odyssey by Homer. And Cyclops, we all know, is the scene where Polyphemus, the one-eyed monster, myopia, short-sighted, bad vision, is stabbed in the eye and has his eye destroyed by Odysseus, or in Joyce's version, Ulysses. So we're in his version of it. We're in the bar, and Bloom is there drinking, and they're debating and having arguments. And Joe is Joe Citizen, and Joe Citizen is Polyphemus, the monster. So, but it's no use, says he. That's Bloom. Force, hatred, history, all this. That's not life for men and women. Insult, hatred. And everybody knows that it's the very opposite of that that is really life. What, says Alf. Love, says Bloom. I mean, the opposite of hatred. I must go now, says he to John Wise. Just round to the court a moment to see if Martin is there. If he comes, just say I'll be back in a second. Just a moment. What's hindering you? And off he pops like grease lightning. A new apostle to the gentles, says the citizen. Universal love. Well, says John Wise, isn't that what we're told? Love your neighbor? That chap, says the citizen. Beggar my neighbor is his motto. Love Moya. He's a nice pattern of a Romeo and Juliet. Love loves to love love. Nurse loves the new chemist. Constable 14A loves Mary Kelly. Gertie McDowell loves the boy that has the bicycle. MB loves the fair gentleman. Lai Chihan love ya kissy chapu chow. Jumbo the elephant loves Alice the elephant. Old Mr. Verschoyle with the ear trumpet loves old Mrs. Verschoyle with the turned-in eye. The man in the brown macintosh loves a lady who is dead. His Majesty the King loves Her Majesty the Queen. Mrs. Norman W. Tupper loves Officer Taylor. You love a certain person, and this person loves that other person, because everybody loves somebody. But God loves everybody.
Hi, I'm Lindsay, and I don't really need to set up what I'm reading because I'm just going to read the very beginning of Calypso, which is when we meet Bloom. So we're meeting him for the first time, and that's what's happening. Mr. Leopold Bloom ate with relish the inner organs of beasts and fowls. He liked thick giblet soup, nutty gizzards, a stuffed roast heart, liver slices fried with crust crumbs, fried hen cod's roes. Most of all, he liked grilled mutton kidneys, which gave to his palate a fine tang of faintly scented urine. Kidneys were in his mind as he moved about the kitchen softly, writing her breakfast things on the humpy tray. Gelid light and air were in the kitchen, but outdoors gentle summer morning everywhere made him feel a bit peckish. The coals were reddening. Another slice of bread and butter, 3, 4, right. She didn't like her plate full, right. He turned from the tray, lifted the kettle off the hob, and set it sideways on the fire. It sat there, dull and squat, its spout stuck out. Cup of tea soon, good, mouth dry. The cat walked stiffly around the leg of the table with tail on high. Meow. Oh, there you are, Mr. Bloom said, turning from the fire. The cat mewed in answer and stalked again stiffly around the leg of the table, mewing. Just how she stalks over my writing table. Purr, scratch my head, purr. Mr. Bloom watched curiously, kindly, the lithe black form. Clean to see the gloss of her sleek hide, the white button under the butt of her tail, the green flashing eyes. He bent down to her, his hands on his knees. Milk for the pussins, he said. Meow, the cat cried. They call them stupid. They understand what we say better than we understand them. She understands all she wants to. Vindictive, too. Wonder what I look like to her. Height of a tower? No, she can jump me. Afraid of the chickens, she is, he said mockingly. Afraid of the chook-chooks. I never saw such a stupid pussins as the pussins. Cruel, her nature. Curious mice never squeal. Seem to like it. Meow, the cat said loudly. She blinked up out of her avid, shame-closing eyes, mewing plaintively and long, showing him her milk-white teeth. He watched the dark eye slits narrowing with greed until her eyes were green stones. Then he went to the dresser, took the jug Hanlon's milkman had just filled for him, poured warm bubbled milk on a saucer and set it slowly on the floor. Grrr, she cried, running to lap. He watched the bristles shining wirily in the weak light as she tipped 3 times and licked lightly. Wonder, is it true, if you clip them they can't mouse after? Why? They shine in the dark perhaps, the tips. Or kind of feelers in the dark perhaps. He listened to her licking lap. Ham and eggs? No. No good eggs with this drought. Want pure fresh water. Thursday, not a good day either for a mutton kidney at Buckley's. Fried with butter, shake of pepper, better a pork kidney at Lugas. While the kettle is boiling, she lapped slower, then licking the saucer clean. Why are their tongues so rough? To lap better, all porous holes. Nothing she can eat? He glanced around him. No. On quietly creaky boots, he went up the staircase to the hall, paused by the bedroom door. She might like something tasty. Thin bread and butter she likes in the morning. Still, perhaps, once in a way. He said softly in the bare hall, I am going around the corner, be back in a minute. And when he had heard his voice say it, he added, You don't want anything for breakfast? A sleepy, soft grunt answered, No, she did not want anything.
This is the very end, the famous Molly Bloom passage at the end. I was asked to do this last year, and I was too shy because I wear 2 pairs of glasses to read, but then I regretted that I didn't do it last year, so I volunteered. So nervous, but this is Molly remembering when Leopold asked her to marry him. Let's see. Who was the first person in the universe before there was anybody that made it all? Who? Ah, that they don't know. Neither do I. So there they are. They might as well try to stop the sun from rising tomorrow. The sun shines for you, he said the day we were lying among the rhododendrons on Half Head in the gray tweed suit and his straw hat. The day I got him to propose to me, yes, first I gave him a bit of seed cake out of my mouth. And it was leap year like now. Yes, 16 years ago. My God, after that long kiss, I near lost my breath. Yes, he said, I was a flower of the mountain. Yes, so we are flowers all, a woman's body. Yes, that was one true thing he said in his life, and the sun shines for you today. Yes, that was why I liked him, because I saw he understood or felt what a woman is, and I knew I could always get round him. And I gave him all the pleasure I could, leading him on till he asked me to say yes. And I wouldn't answer first, only looked out over the sea and the sky. I was thinking of so many things he didn't know of. Mulvey and Mr. Stanhope, and Hester and Father, and old Captain Groves and the sailors playing All Birds Fly and I Say Stoop, and washing up dishes, they called it on the pier, and the sentry in front of the governor's house, the thing round his white helmet, poor devil half roasted. And the Spanish girls laughing in their shawls and their tall combs. And the auctions in the morning, the Greeks and the Jews and the Arabs, and the devil knows who else from all the ends of Europe and Duke Street, and the fowl market all clucking outside Larby Sharon's, and the poor donkeys slipping half asleep, and the vague fellows in the cloaks asleep in the shade on the steps, and the big wheels of the carts of the bulls, and the old castle, thousands of years old, yes, and those handsome Moors, all in white and turbans, like kings asking you to sit down in their little bit of a shop. And Rhonda, the old windows of the posadas, two glancing eyes, a lattice hid for her lover to kiss. The iron in the wine shops half open at night, and the castanets, and the night we missed the boat at Algeciras, the watchman going about serene with his lamp, and oh, that awful deep down torrent, oh, and the sea crimson sometimes like fire, and the glorious sunsets, and the fig trees in the Alameda Gardens, yes, and all the queer little streets, and the pink and blue and yellow houses, and the rose gardens, and the jessamine and geraniums and cactuses, and Gibraltar as a girl, where I was a flower of the mountain, yes, when I put the rose in my hair like the Andalusian girls used. Or shall I wear a red? Yes, and how he kissed me under the Moorish wall, and I thought, well, as well him as another. And then I asked him with my eyes to ask again, yes. And then he asked me, would I, yes, to say, yes, my mountain flower. And first I put my arms around him, yes, and drew him down to me so he could feel my breast all perfume. Yes, and his heart was going like mad. And yes, I said, yes, I will, yes.
So I just was going to read just a little chunk of the beginning of the Oxen in the Sun chapter because it's just so awesome. And it takes place in a hospital, and a woman is going to give birth. So I still have no idea what's going on. It is not why, therefore, we shall wonder if, as the best historians relate among the Celts, whom nothing that was not in its nature admirable admired, the art of medicine shall have been highly honored. Not to speak of hostels, lep-yards, sweating chambers, plague graves, the greatest doctors, the O'Shiels, the O'Hickeys, the O'Lees, have sedulously set down the diverse methods by which the sick and the relapsed found again health, whether the malady had been the trembling, withering, or loose oikanel flux. Well, I've never had that. Certainly in every public work which in it anything of gravity contains preparation should be with importance commensurate, and therefore a plan was by them adopted, whether by having preconsidered or as maturation of experience. It is difficult in being said which the discrepant opinions of subsequent inquiries or inquirers are not up to the present congrued to reader render manifest, whereby maternity was so far from all accident possibility removed that whatever care the patient in the adherent all hardest of woman hour chiefly required, and not solely for the copiously opulent, but also for her who, not being sufficiently moneyed, scarcely, and often not even scarcely, could subsist valiantly, and for an inconsiderable emolument was provided. To her, nothing already then seemed thenceforward was any way able to molestful for this chiefly felt all citizens, except with proficient mother's prosperity, all not to can be, and as they had received eternity, God's mortal's generation to befit them her beholding. When the case was so holding itself, parturient in vehicle their word carrying desire, immense among all one another, was impelling on her to be received into that domicile. O thing of prudent nation, not merely in being seen, but also even in being related worthy of being praised, that they her by anticipation went seeing mother, that she by them suddenly to be about, to be cherished, had been begun, she felt. One more paragraph. Before born babe bliss had, we hope so, within womb one her worship, whatever in that one case done commodiously done was, a couch by midwives attended with wholesome food, reposeful, cleanest swaddles, as though forthbringing were now done, and by wise foresight set. But to this no less were what drugs there is need, and surgical implements which are permitting to her case, not omitting aspect of all this distracting spectacles in various latitudes by our terrestrial orb, offered together with images divine and human, the cognition of which by sea-junked females is to tuition conducive or easy. I'm sorry. It's hilarious. or eases issue in the high, sun-bright, well-built, fair home of mothers, when ostensibly far gone and reproductive. It is come by her thereto to lie in her term up. I don't know nothing about birthing no babies.
I'll find a couple of good ones just to close this out here. All right, so the end of the Cyclops chapter. This is a chapter that Brian had read from. The style of the chapter is kind of, it constantly switches between like a newspaper description of total realism and then just like totally bizarre styles, mythology, and just talking like old ancient texts. And or like describing a boxing match, or it just goes all over the place. Like, and anything that comes up in their regular conversation goes into a tangent of strange styles. So at the end, I feel like those styles kind of combine. And what's going on in the narrative is Bloom is in this bar, and the citizen, who's kind of the Cyclops, he's getting really angry at Bloom. He's starting to yell stuff to him really aggressively about being a Jew, and Bloom is kind of egging him on a little bit and just kind of saying, Jesus was a Jew, his father was a Jew, and all that. And the citizen's getting more and more angry, and Bloom starts to leave, and the citizen's chasing him. He throws like a can of biscuits at Bloom, and the biscuits bounce around the street, and then the paragraph describes it as if it's an earthquake. So just to show you the kind of Joyce's sense of humor. The catastrophe was terrific and instantaneous in its effect. The observatory of Dunsink registered in all 11 shocks, all of the 5th grade Mercalli scale, and there is no record extant of a similar seismic disturbance in our island since the earthquake of 1534, the year of the rebellion of Silken Thomas. The epicenter appears to have been that part of the metropolis which constitutes the Inns Quay ward and parish of St. Michan, covering a surface of 41 acres, 2 roods, and 1 square pole or perch. All the lordly residences in the vicinity of the Palace of Justice were demolished, and that noble edifice itself, in which at the time of the catastrophe important legal debates were in progress, is literally a mass of ruins beneath which it is to be feared all the occupants have been buried alive. From the reports of eyewitnesses, it transpires that the seismic waves were accompanied by a violent atmospheric perturbation of cyclonic character. An article of headgear, since ascertained to belong to the much respected clerk of the Crown and Peace, Mr. George Fautrell, and a silk umbrella with a gold handle with the engraved initials, coat of arms and house number of the erudite and worshipful chairman of quarter sessions, Frederick Falconer, recorder of Dublin, have been discovered by search parties in remote parts of the island, respectively. The former on the 3rd basaltic ridge of the Giant's Causeway, the latter embedded to the extent of 1 foot 3 inches in the sandy beach of Holyopen Bay near the old head of Kinsale. Other eyewitnesses deposed that they observed an incandescent object of enormous proportions hurtling through the atmosphere at a terrifying velocity in a trajectory directed southwest by west. Messages of condolence and sympathy are being hourly received from all parts of the different continents, and the sovereign pontiff has been graciously pleased to decree that a special Missa Pro Defunctus shall be celebrated simultaneously by the ordinaries of each and every cathedral church of all the episcopal dioceses, subject to the spiritual authority of the Holy See and suffrage of the souls of those faithful departed who have been so unexpectedly called away from our midst. The work of salvage, removal of debris, human remains, etc., has been entrusted to Messrs. Michael Mead and Son, Great Brunswick Street, and then just kind of goes on. Yeah, so does anybody else want to read a passage? All right, I'll just read one more and then we'll wrap it up here. So I'm going to read one more from Ithaca. That's my favorite chapter. And so the one I read earlier, he gets on to the science of water. And this one is the end of the night. Bloom and Stephen have just had some tea, and now they're walking out in the backyard, and they're immediately struck by the stars and the Milky Way. And so Bloom starts kind of meditating on the night sky, and he thinks, were there obverse meditations of involution increasingly less vast? Of the eons of geological periods recorded in the stratifications of the earth, of the myriad minute entomological organic existences concealed in cavities of the earth, beneath removable stones, in hives and mounds, of microbes, germs, bacteria, bacilli, spermatozoa, of the incalculable trillions of billions of millions of imperceptible molecules contained by cohesion of molecular affinity in a single pinhead, of the universe of human serum constellated with red and white bodies, themselves universes of void space constellated with other bodies, each in continuity its universe of divisible component bodies, of which each was again divisible in divisions of redivisible component bodies, dividends and divisors ever diminishing without actual division till, if the progress were carried far enough, nowhere was never reached.
Very traditional Irish hornpipes, and nothing but Irish music tonight. It's a set of tunes that Serge learned when he was living in France. He used to live in France. Long time he lived in France. He was actually born in France. So he's actually French. So,
Very French.
yeah. And he was in France one time, and he was at a festival, and he heard these tunes coming from a big stage at a folk music festival. The band playing was called Bloomsday.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. And they had never recorded these, so we thought this would be a nice thing to steal. The first tune, I think, is called Iron Legs, and then the second tune might be called Bewicks, and the third tune is called, what's the third tune called? Go Mauve. Go Mauve. Go Mauve. And they mauve. Mauve is a very soothing color, I understand.
The soccer team.
And then the last tune is called Jan Meine Mann, which is Dutch for On My Man. more set of tunes here. They're traditional jigs from Galway. The first tune is called Tom Billy's, and the next one's called Langstrom's Pony, of course. We played another tune called Tom Billy's earlier tonight. We hope you don't fault us for it, but it was a different tune. Evidently, Tom Billy has a lot of tunes. This was made famous by a great whistle player named Mary Bergen. What's your age? For those of you who used to whistle that tune, or maybe you used to whistle it, but you lost the sheet music. Yeah.
thank all of you for coming out, really appreciate it. And happy Bloomsday, everybody.